Hello and welcome to another episode of Pongified CEDH. With the launch of Bloomborough, we've been given all kinds of fun tools for the CEDH format, but the one that we are looking the most forward to is Flubs the Fool. Now this card may just look like a cute little frog at first, but we want to unlock the power in those skinny little jumping legs. So we've constructed a deck and we've put it to the test against other popular decks right now. Another huge thank you to our sponsor, Le Coin du Jeu. Please don't forget that Le Coin du Jeu is sponsoring us. You can use the code PONGIFIED10 for online orders to get 10% off of your online orders. And with those, you will be getting some custom Pongified tokens. We're very happy to be launching those with art from Gabrielle Morrisseau. Let's break down our competitors. First, we have Jérôme playing Flubs the Fool, our headliner card. Now, this may seem like a silly card at first, but the ceiling is incredibly high. It requires you to risk it all to go hellbent in order to storm off by continuously drawing cards. However, keep in mind that discarding a card is not necessarily a bad thing because we are playing Underworld Breach, and we're also doing other fun combos, such as my personal favorite, Food Chain. Next, we have Max playing Rocco. Rocco is the tutor in the command zone. It's a creature deck that can win with a multitude of different creature-based combos like Dockside and Emiel or Kiki-Jiki combos. Next, we have Ben, who has finally given up on Kinnan and built Tivit, the Artifact Esper Commander. This is a mid-range list that can win in a one-card combo with Time Sieve, and also, of course, packs things like the Thassa's Oracle win con. And finally, we have Phil playing Krark the Thumbless and Sakashima. This is a deck that throws all caution to the wind, storms off, uses an interesting combination of Krark clones to copy spells while returning them to their hand, recasting rituals infinitely, and just accumulating a ton of value into a big storm win con. Jérôme is keeping a hand with Inti, Eternal Scourge, Dramatic Reversal, Soul Ring, Talisman of Creativity, Polluted Delta, and Mystic Remora. Max is keeping a Mana Vault, Exotic Orchard, Fyndhorn Elves, Wirewood Symbiote, Finale of Devastation, Squee the Immortal, and Archivist of Ogma. Ben is keeping a Muddle the Mixture, Tundra, Command Tower, Mana Crypt, Urza Saga, Phyrexian Metamorph, and Hallowed Fountain, and Phil is keeping a Mystical Tutor, Jeweled Lotus, Rhystic Study, Springleaf Drum, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Mox Amber, and Mountain. Let's dive into gameplay. Jay starts us off with a Polluted Delta into a Volcanic Island, and casts himself a Soul Ring, Talisman of Creativity, and of course, the Mystic Remora. Max draws, plays a Marsh Flats, cracks it for a Savannah, and casts a Fyndhorn Elves. Ben plays an Arid Mesa and then sits and thinks for a moment, holds back the Mana Crypt that we know he has, and decides not to feed the fish. Phil, however, plays a Mountain and then talks about how he doesn't even care if he feeds the fish and he's not scared of a little fish and what could possibly go wrong. He then decides to play a multitude of spells. He casts himself a Jeweled Lotus, not paying for the trigger, a Mox Amber, not paying for the trigger, a Rite of Flame, not paying for the trigger, a Springleaf Drum, again not paying for the trigger, and this leaves him with enough fast mana to cast both of his commanders, Krark and Sakashima, as a copy of Krark. He then passes the turn. Jérôme untaps for his second turn and lets the fish die on its first birthday. He then draws for turn, plays a Mana Crypt, exiles an Elvish Spirit Guide for a green, and then casts a Food Chain, which goes uncountered. It resolves. He then plays a Mountain, and then for 3 colorless plays an Eternal Scourge, and this is what happens if nobody pays for the fish. So if you're unfamiliar here, he can exile the Eternal Scourge for 4 mana of any color, and then recast it from exile for 3, and then repeat that until he has infinite mana of any color, which of course he can only spend on creatures, but he does have a creature in the command zone that he will recast over and over and over again to get the storm count up until a ridiculously high number. He names 1 billion, at which point he has 2 mana left, which he will use to cast a Brainstorm, which has Storm. It will be copied infinite number of times, and he will aim 1/3 of a billion at each of his opponents, mill out their decks, and then pass the turn, killing them with their own draw steps. Congrats to Jérôme for a very impressive win. We see the power here of Flubs, although I guess it was really the fish that won. But, we'll still say that Flubs the Thug is owed the win in this case, as well as Jérôme's excellent piloting skills. Well, that was a quick one, so we will move on to the next one. Let's look at the hands for game 2. Phil will be starting off this time with a Brainstorm, Fiery Islet, Odawara, Flick a Coin, Jeweled Lotus, and a London Mulligan of Displacer Kitten and Stormkill Artist. Jerome is playing Flubs, keeping a hand of Scalding Tarn, Gamble, Mox Opal, Tropical Island, Mox Diamond, Veil of Summer, and Ornithopter. Max is keeping a Mana Crypt, Gemstone Caverns, Ranger Captain, Dockside, Command Tower, Windswept Heath, and Commercial District. And Ben is keeping a Mystic Remora, Mindbreak Trap, Silent Clearing, Jeweled Lotus, Mox Opal, and has London Mulliganed a Mana Drain and a Delay. Time for Game 2, but before Phil starts, Max wants to play a Gemstone Caverns as a pregame action, exiling Commercial District. Phil then starts the game off by drawing and playing a Fiery Islet, a Jeweled Lotus, a Mana Crypt, and then attempting to cast a Krark the Thumbless, which Ben will Mindbreak Trap. Feels bad, especially since he could have sequenced it differently. He will, however, use the excess mana and the Jeweled Lotus to recast Krark for 4. Jerome will play a Scalding Tarn, crack it for Volcanic Island, and use that to gamble. He'll search his library for a mystery card, put it into his hand, and discard a card at random, which will be Mox Diamond. Max plays a Command Tower, a Mana Crypt, and casts a Ranger Captain of Eos, which he will use to search for Esper Sentinel to his hand. Ben plays a Silent Clearing, a Mox Opal, and passes the turn. Phil untaps, flips for a Crypt, and draws. He then plays Otawara as his land for turn, and casts his second commander, Sakashima, as a copy of Krark. He then sends Krark over at Ben as revenge for being countered the first time. Jerome plays an Ancient Tomb for turn, casts an Arcane Signet and a Memnite, a Mox Opal, and then for 3 casts a Rhystic Study. Passes the turn back to Max. Max untaps, rolls for Crypt, and draws. He plays a Windswept Heath for turn, and cracks that for a Taiga. He uses that Taiga to cast a Dockside Extortionist, paying for the Rhystic Study. This goes uncountered, enters, and creates 6 treasure tokens for Max. He uses some of those to cast a Rocco with X equals 2, this time not paying for Rhystic Study. And again, this resolves, allowing him to search up a Goblin Engineer, which upon entry will allow him to tutor again and put a Cloudstone Curio into his graveyard. Of course, the known combo piece with Dockside Extortionist. This leaves the table on high alert. He will cast an Esper Sentinel and pass the turn, leaving everybody on the edge of their seat. Ben will untap, draw, play a Mana Confluence, and use that to cast a Mystic Remora, making sure to pay for the Rhystic, and then pass over to Phil, who will draw, play a Scalding Tarn, crack it for a basic mountain, and then pass the turn back to Jerome. Jerome untaps, casts Flubs the Fool, his commander, and then casts a Chromox, which has a plethora of triggers here, so he will not pay for the Mystic Remora or Esper trigger, and to his own trigger he will discard a Goblin Engineer, and then once the Chromox enters, he'll imprint a Veil of Summer. He will play the Tropical Island, the last card in his hand, which will trigger a draw. He will then play that card, a Shield Sphere, which triggers another draw. Following that, he will cast a Lotus Petal, which triggers not only Flubs, causing him to draw, but also Mystic Remora, causing Ben to draw, since he's not going to pay for it. How far can he go? He then casts a Grim Monolith, continuing to draw off with a single card in his hand at a time. He's going to then cast a Lion's Eye Diamond, not pay for the Mystic Remora once again. He's going to follow that up with a Windfall. Now, this will allow him to draw a card with Flub, since that was the last card in his hand. Ben will actually decline the draw with Mystic Remora here. Phil sees all of this going on and decides it's gambling time. He starts off his night at the casino by casting a Brainstorm. This triggers Krark, the second Krark, Rhystic Study, Esper Sentinel, and Mystic Remora. After giving everybody else at the table a draw, we then resolve the coin flips. Phil loses his first coin flip, causing him to return Brainstorm to his hand. He then loses his second coin flip, sadly, and returns a Null spell to his hand. He decides to take a different approach and puts Flip a Coin onto the stack. This again triggers Krark, Rhystic Study, and Mystic Remora. Ben and Jerome each draw a card, and then Phil will resolve his Krark triggers, losing the first flip, making Flip a Coin go back to his hand, and then winning his second flip. In response, however, to his now 2 copies of Flip a Coin on the stack, he will, on offer you can't refuse, his own original copy of Flick a Coin. This puts Again, 2 Krark triggers on the stack, as well as a Rhystic Study and Mystic Remora trigger, neither of which will he pay for. Phil wins his first flip of an offer you can't refuse, meaning that he can create a copy of it. He uses that copy to target his original an offer you can't refuse. For his second Krark trigger, he also wins that, creates a copy, and reroutes that copy over to Flick a Coin. Now that may be very confusing, but the end result, what matters there, is that he ended up with 4 treasures out of that, and with the Flick a Coin back in his hand, which means that he can cast it again, putting all of those triggers back on the stack, letting Ben and Jerome draw once again, and then unfortunately this time losing both of the flips, meaning that it goes back to his hand, it does not resolve, and then he is left with 1 mana, but he is perseverant and he loves giving other players card draw, so he does use that final treasure to put a Brainstorm back on the stack. Triggering Krark, triggering Rhystic, triggering Mystic. This time his luck turns around and he actually wins both of his flips, meaning that he gets 3 copies of Brainstorm, resolves them all, draws 3, puts back 2, draws 3, puts back 2, draws 3, puts back 2, and finally exiles a Simian Spirit Guide to add a red before we finally get back to the resolution of the Windfall. Yes, in case you forgot, this was all at instant speed in response to the Windfall on Jerome's turn. Ben discards 11 cards off the Windfall, which means that all players will draw back to 11. Jerome will resume his stormy turn, play a Gaia's Cradle as his land for turn, triggering Flubs, causing him to discard a Mana Confluence. He will tap that for a bunch of mana, and use that to cast an Intuition targeting Ben, triggering Mystic Remora that he will not pay for. Max decides that enough nonsense has gone on this turn, and finally uses his Ranger Captain, making sure that Jerome cannot cast any more non-creature spells, nor can anybody else at the table. Jerome cracks his Lion's Eye Diamond in response, discarding a handful of apparently win cons, and then Intuition goes back on the stack. He will search himself a Burgi, Inti, and Containment Construct. Ben decides that Burgi is the answer here, the other 2 go to the graveyard. He will cast Burgi, draw a card off Flubs, and we don't know what it is, but sadly he cannot play it. He passes the turn. Max untaps, flips his Mana Crypt, draws and plays a land for turn. He then activates his Goblin Engineer, returning the Cloudstone Curio from his graveyard to his hand. He then casts a Wirewood Symbiote, paying for Rhystic Study. When this enters, he returns the Dockside Extortionist to his hand. He then demonstrates a loop where he can recast the Dockside Extortionist, return the Wirewood Symbiote to his hand, create a large number of treasures using the Dockside Extortionist, and then recast the Wirewood Symbiote to repeat the loop, basically creating an infinite number of treasures this way and getting his storm count to an infinite number. At which point you can start bouncing Rocco to his hand and then recasting Rocco over and over and over, using Twin Shot Sniper, for example, to ping the table down. Although we realized afterwards that Twin Shot does not work with Cloudstone Curio, but he could have alternatively gotten his Kiki Jiki combo out using the tutors on Rocco and killed the table with combat damage, for example. Congratulations to Max for a very patient and calculated win. He really timed it out properly and used a very interesting layer of combos to get there. And thank you to all the other players. Thank you especially to Le Coin du Jeu for continuing to sponsor us. Remember that you can use the code PONGIFIED10 on online orders to get 10% off. That will also come with a Pongified custom token with art from Gabrielle Morrisseau. Thank you so much and have a great day.